Hi, welcome to a new video. So I've been MIA for a couple of months due to several reasons which I won't really get into, but I have continued to read lots of books during that time. I'm not sure I'll really talk about each of them. I might make a separate video summarizing my reading time later, but for now I want to make this video to talk about one specific book. I just want to make a chatty video about a book because it's been a few since I've talked about books. There's not really a big reason that I'm singling out this particular book, other than that I was able to formulate a comprehensive opinion about it compared to the other books that I've read. Unfortunately, that opinion is a bit on the negative side, but honestly that might be why it was so easy for me to have strong opinions about it. So the book that I'm talking about is Dark Lover by J.R. Ward. It's a vampire romance, and honestly, it's not a book I would typically go for. It's was this book, I borrowed it from a friend. She wanted to know what I thought about the book, and I actually read it pretty quickly. I want to say in about 3 days. So it's quite a quick and easy read, and I would say it was pretty entertaining, honestly. But that being said, this book did have a few problems that I didn't really enjoy. It had a lot of tropes that I really didn't like, and I do not like the genre that it fits into as well, and which is paranormal romance, by the way. Like, I've already made a separate video ranting about why I don't like the werewolf genre, which honestly is probably the kind of same or similar reasons that I don't like vampire romance, but I'm just not really as familiar with vampire romance as I am with werewolf romances, which is really kind of why I don't talk about it that much. But well, that was the case until I read this book. Although I will admit that this book is probably not like an umbrella, like it doesn't represent every single book in the vampire romance genre. But, just saying this was kind of like my introduction, I guess. So before I start this video, I already knew that I probably wouldn't like this book when I started reading it. That being said, I did keep an open mind, but I kind of suspected that it would have elements that I really didn't like, which, it's the reason why I avoid this genre in the first place. So basically what I'm saying is that I was probably not the target audience for this book. So I don't want this video to come off as me bashing the genre or bashing the people who read the genre, but just saying that this book was not written for me. I was not, like, I would usually avoid this book because I don't want to, like, hate read or anything. But yeah, it's okay if you like this book, it's okay if you like that genre, it's just a preference thing. And this video is only being created so I can express my opinions about it, because I think it's really interesting reading books in a genre that I don't typically like, and I feel like this could be a kind of case study on what happens when I do. But yeah, I also thought it would be a fun video to make, but that's besides the point. Also, there will be spoilers. I will be talking about the book in its entirety, so leave now if you want to avoid them. So let me do a little bit of a recap about what the book is about. And I actually read this book a while back, so my memory might be a little bit fuzzy, but I'm pretty sure I remember a good chunk of it. So this book follows our two main characters, Wrath and Beth, and there's going to be romance between them, whatever. So Wrath is the only purebred vampire in the world, which means he's the most powerful vampire, because of course he is. Beth is our typical female lead. She's a virgin with a bombshell of a body, being flirted on by every man in a 5-mile radius. To which I want to say she was kind of oblivious to, but it might be that she's just not interested. I don't really know. And there is an explanation to why that is, but I'll get to that later. But to oversimplify the plot of the book, Beth is a human child of a vampire. So her father's a vampire, her mother is a human. In this world, the offspring of vampires have a good chance that they're going to turn into a vampire at a certain age, which I believe is 25. If not, it's like in that age range. The world building is a little bit obviously created to specifically cater to certain tropes that happen in this book. I'll get into it a little bit more later on, but for now, this is just the plot of the book. So Beth's dad is a vampire named Darius, and Darius suspects that she's going to turn into a vampire, and the process of turning into a vampire is very dangerous because there is a chance that you will die, and there are certain precautions that need to be taken before someone turns into a vampire. The most important one being that a vampire of the opposite gender must be present in order to feed the one who's turning their blood. And again, this has to do with the world building, and this is what I'm talking about when I say the world building caters to certain tropes. But basically, in this world, vampires can only survive by feeding on the blood of vampires of the opposite gender. So yeah, so there's a decent chance that a human turning into a vampire will die, especially if they're male. It's more fatal for male vampires. And so it's a fatal and brutal process. So Darius asks Wrath to be there for his daughter when she turns into a vampire and give her his blood. So Wrath, being a purebred vampire, has powerful blood, so it maximizes the chances of Beth surviving her turning into a vampire. Wrath refuses until Darius is blown up in his car, which kills him. And he seeks out Beth, and then the romance happens, yada yada. And then there's another plot where the vampire's mortal enemy is planning to kill Rat's brotherhood, because that brotherhood is the only thing standing in the way of vampire extinction. And by the way, they're the one who's responsible for Darius's death, which kind of kickstarts the romance. And yeah, that's basically what it is. So that was a lot, but I think I did my best summarizing the important bits. I'm going to be splitting this video into different sections because there is a lot that I do want to talk about in this book. So these are going to be the points that I'll be talking over, or going over, nice and simple. So we'll get started with that. Okay, so starting with the world building, I actually kind of like the world. So, because there's a certain set of rules that are set for vampires in this world, and it's like followed throughout the book. There is no, like, deus ex machina that kind of gives them leeway to break these rules. It's always being followed, which gives certain limits to what these vampires could do, and I thought that was actually a pretty good thing about this book. The lore was also pretty interesting. There's a whole backstory of how the vampires and their enemies, which are called lessers, were created and why there's a whole conflict there, which I thought that was pretty interesting as well. But I still do have certain complaints about the world building because it is used as an obvious device to have certain tropes present in this book. That being said, I do kind of appreciate that the author is at least giving the reason that these tropes have to be present, but doesn't mean that I have to like it. So one huge example of this is for the trope of the clueless virgin being a thing in this world. It's the reason that this happens to Beth is because before humans turn into vampires, they exhibit a set of behavioral traits that kind of act as, I guess, a precursor or as a hint that they are going to turn into vampires. And so they can, prepare and whatever. So I guess it's kind of like bears eating a lot before they hibernate, that sort of thing, because this is going to be a very dangerous process. So one of the traits is actually that they're going to be really, really hungry, and no matter how much they eat, they're still going to be hungry and they're going to keep wanting to eat. Another rule is that they're sexually inactive and they are completely uninterested in any sort of romantic relationship. And granted, I kind of see why this is a thing, because I guess there would be that trade-off for a human to be reproductively inactive. The body uses more of its energy to prepare for a much more dangerous task. So biologically, I actually kind of see how this works. However, I know that this was kind of put in there in order to have the typical virgin trope, which I mean, like, I appreciate the reasoning for it, but I just still hate that this is a thing, that typical clueless virgin given to a 1,000-year-old vampire who obviously had other previous partners. But whatever. Like, I appreciate what the world building does, but again, this is what I'm talking about when I say that the world building forces certain tropes that I don't like to be in this book. So there's another example of this, which this one is a little bit less forgivable to me, is the fact that vampires can only survive by feeding on other vampires of the opposite gender. Like, I don't understand why it has to be the opposite gender. Like, that's the thing that I don't really understand. And, it just opens, there's a whole other can of worms in terms of gender fluidity and trans and whatnot. But, it's like, yeah, so that one I'm a little bit more of like a, okay, sure. And it's obviously just a setup to be the reason that Beth and Wrath, like the love interest, have to stay in close proximity, and of course the drinking blood from each other thing, which for some reason I knew this before because I've read some vampire books on Wattpad, never finished them because I couldn't okay, just they were bad, but yeah, I know it's a trope where vampires sucking blood from the love interest is for some reason seen as hot. Anyway, that being said, it does bring up an interesting conflict. So there's this doctor character in the book who lost his significant other. I forget what the vampire spouses are called, but essentially in werewolf terms, they're mates. So in this vampire society, the vampire that you drink blood from is essentially your mate. Although there are vampires that drink from multiple partners, so it's kind of more like a one-night stand situation for them. Regardless, the doctor, and I also forget his name, I might have to look it up, but he lost his mate and refuses to drink from any other female. His sister is also technically Raz's mate, but because she has to drink his blood to survive, and she was kind of like, by the society, she was kind of assigned to be basically his wife. And Raz doesn't reciprocate her feelings, and she's kind of like the submissive type, only doing it because society tells her to type of character. But yeah, it's obvious that Raz has no romantic feelings for her, and even though he does care about her, he doesn't want her, like, he hates that she's put in that position because he can't give her what she wants or deserves or whatever. And the doctor actually hates Raz because of this, and he wants his sister to leave Raz. So combined with his own issue of refusing to drink blood from another vampire, and his sister being kind of, I guess, a victim of the society or this rule, I guess you could say, he wants to create artificial blood so vampires won't be forced to be bound to a codependent relationship. And this has been tried before and it fails because vampires just, for some reason, they cannot survive in artificial blood. So he's trying to unlock that secret of how to create artificial blood that vampires can survive on. And I thought it was like a really interesting topic, and I really quite liked that the author explores these rules that she set up, even though it's clearly being the device that pushes the main love interests together. I still liked the way she explores different aspects of the vampire cultures. So again, I thought that the rules on vampires were really interesting, even if they were a bit of a crutch for propelling the romance. Like, at least they cleverly set up conflicts and they explore different aspects of vampire society. Like, another example of this is Wrath, because he's a purebred vampire and has no human blood mixed in. He has certain weaknesses that other vampires don't usually have. Because he's a purebred vampire, he can't go out into the sun because it burns his skin, and his eyesight is really poor, so he just covers it with his sunglasses. He's legally blind, and he uses his other senses to get around. But it was really interesting because he's weak against, or he has weaknesses that don't bother or that aren't present in half-human vampires, which they are deemed as the inferior beings because Wrath is essentially being set up to be the king of vampires simply because he's a purebred vampire and he has those weaknesses. And I think that's just so interesting. And I also do really like that thought was put into that, because the reason that Wrath has those weaknesses is because vampires are supposed to be nocturnal and, night, no light, so they won't need good eyesight, or maybe they won't rely as much on their eyesight to get around. So I thought it was like a clever nod to biology in the way that was set up as his weaknesses. So yeah, it's honestly, it's an odd case here because I don't like the world building for plot reasons, but I do like it because of the way it was explored. And the book does a pretty good, it's pretty good at justifying some of the tropes I don't like. And honestly, if I did like the tropes, then I would have gobbled this book up because of the way the world building justifies them. So, moving on to the characters, I wasn't particularly invested in any of them, especially the main characters, but I guess they were just fine for the story. I didn't particularly hate them, except for the villain. The villain was awful. I did not like him, and I think he was kind of stupid. And I am going on an entire tangent just talking about him, but the villain was not a good. I don't think he was a very good character. I really did not like him, and he was like such a basic villain. I thought he was boring, and his motivation was terrible, and I did not like him. And there's a reason why I don't think he was smart, and it has to do with the ending of the book, which I'm going to make a separate section for that, because the ending of the book was kind of trash, if you ask me. But back to the other characters. So they were fine, I guess. Out of the two main characters, Wrath was actually, I felt like, was a more complex character because, first of all, he's not as bad a love interest as I've seen previously in other books, especially within the paranormal romance genre. He is that hyper-masculine, possessive character, but I feel like he has quite a bit of depth to him that makes him a compelling character because, and this is kind of the bare minimum, but I wasn't really expecting it from this book, he has a character arc that is independent of him being in love with Beth. So his character development happens outside of him being in love with Beth. And I've seen this to be a problem in quite a few romance books that I've read before. And not all romance, of course, but it's a common problem that I've seen because it's essentially where the good girl turns the bad boy into a good boy. That's basically what it is. Like, you know, the entire character development hinges on his relationship with the good girl. So I like that that wasn't done in this book. Wrath, his character development is more so of him stepping up into a leadership role because the Vampire Society wants him to be king. He doesn't want to be king because he doesn't think he'll be very good at it, and then he steps up to the role, and that's essentially what his character arc is. So I feel like that gives him inner conflict and some depth outside of his romance. So I did like that about him, and you know how low the bar is if that's why I like the character. Because you know, Beth kind of suffers from that problem because I feel like her entire character development happens because she's in love with Wrath, and it has to do with her relationship with Wrath. Her becoming stronger is because of her becoming a vampire and she's under Wrath's protection. I don't know. I might have missed things that give her her own character arc, but from what I remember, Beth's entire character arc just revolves around her being in a relationship with Wrath. A poorly developed one, by the way, so it doesn't even really hold for a particularly strong case for her character development, because her character development, what I took away, was essentially her not knowing where she, like, you know, the feeling of not fitting in the human society, and then she essentially finds a place within the vampire group, I guess, the brotherhood, essentially. She becomes like that's the found family aspect, I guess is what I'm trying to say, is her finding her new family, which, you know, of course, that's done because of her relationship with Wrath, other than anything, because she doesn't even really have a relationship with any of the other brotherhood members. It's only because she's with Wrath that they're accepting of her. So yeah, it's not that great of a character arc, if you ask me. Other than that, the other characters are fine. I will talk about one other character, Butch. He's a police officer, and he's supposed to be the third leg of the love triangle, the one that obviously doesn't get the girl. And this guy, he was insufferable for, I would say, the first half of the book. I do not understand what his obsession was with Beth, and it was creepy. He was a creep because he would make ultimatums with Beth for her to go on a date with him in exchange for her to get information about certain things, because she's a reporter, so she gets stories from the police. And essentially, he holds information until she goes on dates with him, which, you know, I just found him a little bit creepy. And then he, like, kind of gets melodramatic in the middle. He's like, oh, like, I'm this broken guy and I can't love anyone, blah, blah, blah. So he starts going around sleeping with prostitutes and whatever, which makes me wonder why he wants to go out with Beth, because then he'd just be dragging her into his misery, because it's been stated in his perspective why he knows that no woman would stay with him is because he knows he'll ruin her, and yet he wants to pursue Beth. It doesn't make much sense to him, and I feel like that makes him such a terrible character. The only reason that I tolerate his character is because later on in the book he actually develops a relationship with the vampires in the Brotherhood, And see, that's the thing. I feel like that integration should have gone to Beth. Like, then that would have made for a better, because for some reason more character development went into Butch than Beth, and Butch is like the side character. It doesn't make any sense. He gets accepted into the Brotherhood despite being human, and he shouldn't be able to fit in, but he does because he develops a relationship with them. And I feel like that should have been done for Beth. Okay. It's just, I feel like there were some choices made that I feel like would have been better if other decisions, like if, I don't know, you know what I'm saying. And that's the only reason, because I really loved the way his relationship with the Vampire Brotherhood kind of grew, and it developed him as a character, and his personality started to shine because he would have banter and interactions with these other Brotherhood members, and then essentially they accepted it, and then like their interests were shown, and it was such a cute development, and I adored it because that's essentially the found family aspect of it. It should have gone to Beth. I'm like going off script here, but it should have gone to Beth. That would have made this book so much better. Okay, I'm getting off track, but I would have loved it so much more if he was at least a likable character. But the first half of that book, he was insufferable and annoying, and he got in the way of every development of the information, I guess, that Beth was getting about her true identity, I guess, and her father, because she didn't know her father was a vampire. He would keep getting in the way of that, and it was really annoying. So yeah, that's all I have to say. Villain was trash. Butch was trash for the first half, and then kind of okay on the second half, only because he stopped pursuing Beth. Wrath was probably the best character from the main pool of characters that this book was concentrated on, and Beth was just bland. Which brings me to the next point. The romance in this book was awful. It was easily the worst part about it. Beth and Red's entire relationship revolved around them having sex. Literally every single time these two met, they would have sex. Like, there was no development there. And I guess this is supposed to be a thing because this book is erotica, which honestly it didn't really feel like it when I was reading, but I feel like there should have been a little bit more effort put into building up their relationship, because I have no idea what it is about Beth that Wrath loves so much, or what it is about Wrath that Beth loves so much. Wrath, by the way, he's a 300-year-old vampire, and he has never fallen in love. So I don't understand why he immediately falls at Beth's feet when she wants him to touch her. Like, has he not seen any other woman in his life? Like, I don't understand. Because, like, what is it about Beth that is so different that he would feel this way about her and no one else? There was, like, no tension in their relationship. There was nothing there that held this relationship together, other than the fact that they liked having sex with each other, I guess. It's bad enough that their entire romance starts off as Insta Love, because literally the first time when they met, they had sex. But the way they met is even worse. So basically, Wrath breaks into Beth's apartment. And the reason he does this is because he needs to let her know that she's about to turn into a vampire, and that's a very dangerous thing. But Beth doesn't know that. To her, he's a stranger in her house. He scares her half to death. But all Beth can think of is how hot he is and how aroused she is around him. Like, excuse me? Like, that's all she can think about. And, by the way, I want to say, this is less than 2 weeks, maybe even less than 1 week, since she was sexually assaulted by one of the villains. The way Beth was introduced, she was sexually assaulted. And not much time has passed since then, and she just wants to have sex with a random guy that's broken into her house. Like, how does this make any sense? It's, like, I don't understand. The romance is so poorly developed. And you know what's worse is this book actually, it has a second case of Insta Love. So you remember Butch, the creepy cop that was in Beth's love triangle. And you remember the doctor's sister, her name is Marissa, by the way, who is technically supposed to be Rat's wife. Well, now you probably know how that conflict was resolved, because Wrath and Beth only want each other, they don't want anyone else. There was Insta Love between Butch and Marissa. Because why the hell not? Like, I don't understand why that choice was made, because I do not think a second romance subplot was necessary at all in this book. But the worst part about it is that The reason Butch is so attracted to Marissa is because she's not like other girls. She's innocent, and that turns him on for some god-awful reason. Like I said, this character is bad, and I hate that he is critical in my favorite aspect of this book. It just, oh, why would you have to be there? Because this is the best. Okay, going off on a tangent, but it was insufferable reading about how Marissa was torturing Butch by turning him on with her innocence. Like, yikes. His creep factor just skyrocketed. Because, which this doesn't make any sense, like I said, but Marissa, for some weird reason, has no sexual experience, even though she's been a vampire for quite a while. So her being a human about to turn into a vampire, so and thus she's not sexually active. Like, why does she have to be the second woman in this book to have some kind of romantic relationship, and she's also a virgin, and that's why she attracts the guy? Like, I don't understand why that's a thing. Anyway, so the romance is non-existent. I wasn't interested in it at all because these characters have no development in terms of their relationship, and I have no idea why these characters are in love with each other than the fact that they are hot. Like I mentioned before, the ending of the book was bad, or at least the climax of the book was. So I don't even really remember what the main villain's plan was, but this is how the last few chapters of the book went, and this is why I think the villain is just really dumb, and I was not intimidated by him at all. So Mr. X, that's the villain, he walks over to where the vampires are for some reason. I don't really remember, but he's for some reason present where the vampires are. And he randomly sees Beth, who's out and about. And somehow I'm not 100%, but I'm pretty sure he knows who she is to Raz. So he decides he will dart her with a tranquilizer that he's been developing for previously in the books. Like, it shows him developing the tranquilizer. But he darts her with a tranquilizer that he's been developing to capture vampires. It wasn't a plan. He was just strolling around. I don't even really know why he was there. And he sees her and kidnaps her. Like, he didn't even know she was going to be there. It even states in the book that he was excited when he saw her because he was like, oh my gosh, I'm so lucky, I didn't know she would be here. And Raz is trapped because he can't go out into the sun. The entire reason Beth was even out there was because she had just transitioned into a vampire, and she wanted to know if she could walk in the sun as a vampire. And while she's doing that, Mr. X just comes and kidnaps her. So yeah, there's that. Like, I don't even really remember exactly what he was planning for her, but this part of the book had me really confused. Like, what a random way for the villain to antagonize the main characters. Like, seriously, a kidnapping. By this point, I was warming up to Beth a little bit because I liked how she insisted on doing things by herself against Raz's possessiveness, and how strong she was coming out to be, bland as she might be. But of course, this trope of kidnapping the female lead has to be just thrown in there. Like, why? Why was that necessary? I don't think that was a good idea. It's just worse that Mr. X didn't even plan for the kidnapping. The entire reason that the sequence of events and the ones that follow in Wrath foiling Mr. X's plan and destroying his base is because of the sheer dumb luck in Mr. X stumbling across Beth and kidnapping her. Like, that's so dumb. And, like, you know, the entire book is kind of setting up Mr. X to be this super smart, super sneaky villain. And he has, like, this cover of being, like, a judo master, and he, like, scouts out for recruits to be a lesser, because there's a whole process in becoming a lesser, because lessers aren't human the way vampires aren't human. And there's a whole process in recruiting them, and he tries to look for good candidates as a teacher of judo. I believe it was judo, some kind of martial arts. And it sets him up to be this, like, super cunning villain, but that happens in the end, and it's just so dumb. Like, it just turns out that he's just really stupid, and the only reason he lives is because Raph lets him escape. Like, it's so dumb. Like, I'm done. Yeah, just needs to rant about that a little bit. Villain sucks. I think I'm about finished talking about this book, so I'm just going to finish this video off with a conclusion, so to speak. I'm going to just quickly wrap things up by recapping things that I didn't like about this book, and then finish off with what I liked. Let's just finish on a positive note, yes? So things I really did not like about this book. There were a lot, but a few things that stood out to me is, first of all, the entire romance, which it's technically it's the whole point of this book is it's supposed to be a romance, but I feel like the romance was just really bad. The fact that the world building is entirely centered on these two having a romance, as well as the fact that Wrath is, first of all, I hate the trope of the supernatural being having like several hundred years on the love interest. Like I hate that age gap difference. It's disturbing to me and it's like it freaks me out. I do not like it at all. And it's like that plus the fact that Wrath, he literally he calls Darius his brother, and the two they're like drinking like old buddies, and Wrath is just like broken when, or he like kind of breaks down a little bit when Darius is killed. But the fact that he and Darius are essentially considering each other brothers, and Wrath falls in love with Darius's daughter, like I feel like that's such a skewed and awkward and kind of creepy relationship, and I could not get by that. Like, from the beginning, the entire romance was just ruined for me, just solely because of that one simple fact that Wrath considers Beth's dad his brother. It's freaky, it freaks me out, it's creepy, and it doesn't help the fact that Wrath himself is, like, several hundred years older than Beth's dad as well. Like, I don't like it. That was a huge turnoff for me in the book, and let's just say that I wouldn't have been into the romance even if it was well developed because of that. It just freaks me out too much for it to work for me. There was Butch. I already talked about it, about why I didn't like him. He likes to also he's also kind of condescending to other women as well. Like, he puts Beth on a pedestal, and then, like, he kind of basically treats the prostitutes that he sleeps with like trash, which I didn't like that at all. Like, nope, I didn't like that. Hey, so I was editing, and I kind of wanted to expand on this particular point. The one of the reasons that I find Butch really super creepy and I really don't like his character is because I just find it really weird that the women he's pursuing, the ones that he puts up on a pedestal and he deems like super special, are the ones who are very inexperienced, despite being beautiful, and the ones who are so innocent and gullible, I guess, and has like no sexual experience. And then the women that he completely trashes and doesn't treat very well are the prostitutes, basically. And he treats them more like objects that he could turn to when he's stressed out or when he needs to release some pent up emotions or something like that. And then he like kind of looks down on them as well. And I don't know, it's just a little bit questionable for me to see that, and it just like it makes him so creepy. Why is he like pursuing the women who has no sexual experience? I just think that that's like, is it really coincidence that the two women that he's in love with in this book are the two women who doesn't have any sexual experience? Like, is that not weird? I don't know, I'm just throwing it out there. Like, I'm just realizing that there is a reason why I did not like this character and why he's a very, very greasy and like giving me weird vibes type of character. World building, again, I talked about it. I liked it, but also didn't like it because it like forces these tropes that I really don't like to be there. Also, the Insta Love. The Insta Love is just awful. Like, at least werewolves, I can't believe I'm using werewolves as a positive example, but at least in werewolves, the reason that Insta Love is a thing is because they're predestined mates. So as soon as they see each other, there's this connection and they know they were soulmates and they belong with each other. Something like that doesn't even happen in this book. It's like that these two, Wrath and Beth, they see each other and literally they just immediately want to have sex with each other. Like, that's literally that's what it is. There's not even like this other supernatural bond forcing them together. So yeah, like, as much like, why, like, you're gonna use world building to justify certain tropes, like Beth being a virgin and sexually inactive with anyone else and thus inexperienced, but you're not gonna add in a little more world building to justify Insta Love. Like, go all the way then, why don't you? Like, ugh, I don't know, that kind of bothered me, the fact that this Insta Love trope was there when it didn't have to, because this one trope, at least, it could have been taken out. It didn't have to be in the book because the world building didn't justify it. And it's a trope that I really don't think worked as a positive for this book. So I feel like it would have been so much better if there was a little bit more build up of their relationship and of them getting to know each other a little more before they like basically move in together and proclaim each other as their one and only. Like I just feel like the romance was very poorly developed. I did not like that at all. I think I'll just leave it off there. There were like a bunch of other stuff that I didn't like, but those were probably the main points. The stuff that I did like, of course, there was that found family dynamic I've already spoke about several times before in this video. That was probably the only thing that I actually really liked about this book. I also did really like that in the Brotherhood, it's very clear that they're really loyal to each other and that they would die for each other. They would do anything for each other, and I liked how their different personalities clashed with each other, but at the same time they were also kind of balancing each other out. So there was that I really liked. I also really liked Butch's developing relationship with the vampires in the Brotherhood, but I did not like him outside of that. I didn't like him by himself as a character. I didn't like him pursuing Beth, and I didn't like him in the romance with Marissa. It sucked, and I didn't like it. Oh, and this is supposed to be things I liked about the book, so oops. Um, so yeah, the found family trope, yay. um, I thought there was more that I liked about this book, but I guess no. Oh no, there was that other thing that I really liked. Um, is I really liked the names of the vampires in the Brotherhood. I thought it was just like really fun because they would have these names like Wrath is spelled Wrath, like Wrath, but there are these other brothers in the Brotherhood. They would have names like Vicious, and one of them is like Zadist, so like sadist, but it's spelled differently, and Vicious is spelled like a Vishous, and so on and so forth. And Rage, I believe, was spelled like Rhage, and I think it's just like really fun. Like the names were really fun. I liked that. And the way they were like, the adjectives they represent and whatnot. Like I just thought that was a fun part of it. Other than that, yeah, that's all I've got to say about this book. So that last part got really rambly, but yeah, I'm just gonna wrap it up there. So thanks for watching, and yeah, I'll be off then. Don't know if I'll be posting another video, but just wanted to have a little bit of a book talk, so here it is.